bring out our next guest here. When I was growing up, this is before I even knew what famous was. So I was born in the late 80s. I was born in 87. So when... everybody, all right. Okay, all right. Who just booed? I can't help it. I have no control over it. Before I knew kind of what famous was, I knew that Great Big Sea were famous. Like, I knew that if someone had said, Tom, you know, the little boy with his pail, because when you're a child, it's a pail, never a bucket. And they said, Tom, I don't know why I brought that up, but Tom, what is a famous person? I'd be like, Elvis, because I would have heard of Elvis on like my dad's placemat or something like that. Or like Robert Redford, because mom liked Robert Redford. A little too much. And I would have said Great Big Sea. I'll give you an example if you're from away of how much he means to us. I saw a photo of this is back when Danny Williams was premier, and it was a photo on Facebook of Danny Williams and this gentleman you're about to meet, and it said the premier of Newfoundland and Labrador and Danny Williams. Please welcome to the stage Alan Doyle. How are you, Alan?
Pretty wicked.
What time did you fly out this morning?
Arse o'clock.
Quarter to arse.
Quarter to arse. I got up. That was, first of all, I got to say, I really enjoyed the interview with Tom. I enjoyed that. That's a good book if you didn't have it.
We're here to talk about the book, A Newfoundlander in Canada, which is partly about your discovery of Canada through Great Big Sea, and also partly sort of about the early days of the band, which I found, as a fellow Newfoundland musician, I found particularly inspiring. So I want you to take everybody back to the beginning if you can. And you sort of, you glance at it in the book. You say, oh yeah, I'm back when Sean, Bob, and Daryl said, hey, do you want to join my band? Yeah. But do you remember where that
I
was?
do, exactly.
Where was it?
I was on Water Street walking up, I was still working at the Newfoundland Museum, and I was walking up Water Street right in front of the Royal Bank building. Yeah. And Sean McCann from a band called Rankin Street was walking towards me. It would have been about November of 1992.
Daytime?
Yeah, lunchtime, yeah. And Sean stopped. I was going to go and introduce myself, say, hey man, I love your band. And he said, hey man, my name is Sean. I was like, yeah, I said, we're thinking about busting up Rankin Street and starting a new band. And I saw you at the Rose and Thistle last week, and I think you're the guy we want in the new band. That's exactly where it started.
And so what went through your head at that moment?
Yes, I said yes. Because, I mean, back a little bit before that, I mean, I'd been living in St. John's for 5 or 6 years. Then I'd moved. I sort of left Petty Harbour as a 16 or 17-year-old because I had this job working at the Newfoundland Museum. I was a tour guide at the Newfoundland Museum. And so if anybody was at the Newfoundland Museum between 1987 or 1985 and like 1991, and some, you know, peachy mustached fella talked the face off you while you were trying to politely read
about the Great Auk.
About the Great Auk. That was probably me. And Sean and Bob and Daryl had a band called Rankin Street, and they were the kings of the downtown pub scene in the late 80s and early 90s of St. John's.
So you sensed something different about these guys?
Well, yeah,
they didn't seem like a normal band.
No, they had a show. Even in the pubs, they were like, and they played music. They played trad music. Primarily, they did a little bit of Newfoundland music, but primarily they did like Irish pub tunes, and they did them so rocked up and aggressive. I loved it. You know, it reminded me of Spirit of the West and a few other bands I knew at the time that were doing that kind of thing. And when they came to me, they wanted to. They didn't really have a songwriter or any like a rock and roll musician in the band. And of course, most of my apprenticeship was playing both rock and roll music and traditional music growing up in Petty Harbour. And I played in, you know, my Uncle Ronnie's rock and roll band for, you know, since I was 13, basically. Right. So they, you know,
legal. It was a legal situation.
And here's the big thing. I very, very cleverly mentioned to Sean in the conversation right outside the Royal Bank that I had a van. And I like to tell myself every now and again, You know, I think Alan, they saw you play, and it was your guitar playing and your songwriting it was the band.
Yeah. They walked outside the Rose and Thistle and said, "Who owns that van?"
Who owns that red van?
The guy up on stage. I think he's in.
If you want to get in a band, you can practice and all that stuff. But you shouldn't really get a band.
Did you, early on in the book, you talk about it going out across Newfoundland, and you painted it as, you would go to bed and you'd be thinking about Lewisport and Toilegate the next night, but you would always have your dreams on Canada. You'd be thinking about Canada. And I have to think that there were a lot of bands in Newfoundland. There had been a lot of bands in Newfoundland. Did you feel at the time that you guys were a little bit different than everyone else?
I knew that, well, I was lucky because Sean and Bob and Daryl had this experience, right? I would have been it was a huge leap forward for me to get to play around the province of Newfoundland. I thought that was amazing because I'd never really been anywhere, and to get to play in Gander and Grand Falls and Stephenville and Corner Brook, geez, that was incredible as far as I was concerned. But they had already done that, really.
Right.
They had their eyes set on Canada, which for me might as well have been Malta or Sweden or something.
Well, tell me more about that, because we were talking about that growing up. That like my mother, when she was growing up, she was in university. She went to England and she went to Portugal, but she had never been to Ottawa or Toronto. And I think that people who aren't from here don't know that our parents' generation and even our generation are. We didn't have that same relationship to the country.
No, it's funny, isn't it? Because I always talk about three things about the book, why I thought it would be interesting maybe for people to read about seeing the country the way I discovered it, because I had the most unique lens. And I talk obviously about where I'm from. I'm from one of the ends of it, so mine has got a long way to go to get to the other side.
Yeah, right.
And and eventually when I did get to see Canada, I saw it out the window of a band van, which is a unique way to see ending, trust me. And but of course the big thing was my position in sort of like the geography and the history of Newfoundland and Canada, and Newfoundland in Canada, is that, and it's a term that we were joking about earlier, but it shocks people to hear it. But I'm a first generation Canadian. My mother and father weren't born in Canada, and it sounds like a kind of a turn of phrase or some whimsical thing, but it's true. Like my grandparents, 2 generations before me in Petty Harbour, they didn't know anything about Canada. They knew lots about England,
right,
lots about Ireland, and they knew there was Portuguese boats parked up in Petty Harbour every summer when I was a kid. But I never met anyone from Calgary. I met lots of people from Lisbon.
Yeah.
I'm serious.
No, very true.
And it's like, I didn't know anything about it. And I knew Tommy Hunter and Hockey Night in Canada. That's it. And I loved it. And people from my grandparents' generation didn't. They resented Canada because they didn't vote to join it. From where I'm from, Newfoundland, they didn't vote to give up Newfoundland independence, and then Canada became this place that they lost their sons to. And they're always worried, they go up to Toronto now and get on to weed, and
guilty.
Still to this day. Canada was not only a foreign thing to me. What I knew about Canada, apparently I was from Canada, and what I saw, I liked Tommy Hunter. I enjoyed the songs, and I liked Hockey Night in Canada. So I kind of wanted to check. I didn't mind being Canadian. I thought it was pretty cool.
So you head up to Canada, which my grandmother would still say to me even 5 years ago.
You're going up to Canada.
So Tom, you're living up in Canada now, I suppose, are you?
My grandfather would say, "You're going up to Canada, yeah. What are they like?" And I would say, my cousin at the time would say, "Oh, they're all right, yeah. Yeah, I heard that." That was the best compliment I ever heard my grandfather give Canada. When my cousin said, "I think they're all right." "Yeah, I heard that."
So you get off the ferry for the first and last time, the only time you've ever taken the ferry.
One time.
Yeah, and then you go to the lower deck in Halifax to play a gig. And tell me about that experience, because that feels like a very formative moment where all of a sudden these dreams that you had in Petty Harbour, these dreams you had as a kid, it might have started to work out.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, first things, like I always try to explain to give it context about being a band from St. John's, right? And unlike Tom, spoke earlier about growing up in the musical world of Central North America, I wasn't from there, right? I was from out here, and I try to give that some kind of context in the book. Like I always say, like, one of, if not the most important thing for a band is to have easy access to other places to play.
Yeah.
Right? So let's pick a random number in the book. Say, like, let's say another town of 30,000 people, right? And so that's a modest-sized large town or small city or whatever. So, look, say take Hamilton, for example, and draw a 5-hour driving circle around Hamilton. That's what bands do. Get in the thing, drive for 5 or 6 hours, play a gig. How many towns of 30,000 people are available to the Hamilton band? Dozens, if not maybe 100, I don't know. I can tell you how many. Draw the same circle around St. John's. And the answer is 0. And then I go, just for effect, I go, okay, we'll double it. Now the band from Hamilton is pretty well in New York City, right? The number for St. John's is still 0. Add another 5 hours to it. The answer is still 0. Add another 5 hours to it. The answer is still 0. And you're bobbing in the Gulf then, hoping someone in Sydney will like you. But even when we started, Sydney didn't have that many people. So when we finally arrived in Halifax, I always say Halifax for a band from Newfoundland was and probably remains the most important city on planet Earth. Like you got to have Halifax, or you got to turn around and go home. Because it's 2 days, like, and you've got no money left, and your Irving sandwiches are gone, and like you got. So when we arrived at the lower deck, it was like, again, it was like we were the band built for that club, and we felt like that club was built for our band. It was perfect. Every time we played there, it was perfect. And we were so lucky to have, because it was all about songs, right? It was all about singing and songs, and there was a lot of tune bands kicking around in Nova Scotia, and even still, like Cape Breton fiddling and instrumental stuff. But they didn't have singers, they didn't have songs.
Right.
Like, and that's what that pub wanted then. And so when we arrived there, it was like, it gave us the first of many sort of springboards, or whatever you want to call it, across the country.
And then you never quite go into detail about what a tap suck might be.
I figured it would be too blue for the book or whatever. No, but it's exactly what you think. It's like, at the lower deck at the time, and I assume the same place, we didn't have a lot of draft beer places in Newfoundland. Like, you poured pints and all that stuff, but there was, up in the mainland, they had this thing where, you get like little 8-ounce glasses of beer. How is that for?
It's like John Harris says, up in the mainland, they buy pizza sober and eat it on the whole.
I remember going out. I think it was Daryl or someone in the band when we started these little 8-ounce glasses of beer, going like, "What's that for your tooth?" I said, "I feel like having in your tooth." But a tap suck is, so you click the thingy, not like a pint thing where you pull it and it pours the whole time. You just flick the tap, and it would pour 8 ounces of, like Moosehead or whatever, or whatever in Nova Scotia, and a celebration at the lower deck for bands that, especially if you were graduating from there, was to go, you'd scooch in, and you'd lie down backwards under the tap, and someone would pull it, and 8 ounces of beer would go whoosh. And then the joke would be to see how many times you could do it, right, in a row.
How'd you do?
I barfed on the first one. But I do know of a Newfoundland musician, who I'll tell you about after, who stopped at 13.
No way. And he's here tonight, Sandy Morris, everybody. In those early days in the lower deck and in those early concerts, there was a lot of young Newfoundlanders who had heard about you from, people living back in St. John's. Did you feel like an ambassador?
Not in the early days, no. Because we never thought about that stuff in the earliest days. We couldn't believe our luck. that we got there, and the gig was good. And then the fellow in Charlottetown had a pub too, and we went there. And then schools started hiring us, and we got to play at all the Atlantic Canadian universities. The next thing we're in Toronto, playing up there, and like everywhere we went, we saw flags and we saw people coming who were away at school or living away in Toronto or living at wherever. And but the whole ambassador thing really we never talked about it in the first 3-4 years of the band.
Did it only become clearer in Ottawa? The Ottawa chapter of this book is, I would say, kind of the major turning point of the book for me. Now, I'll tell the story as best I can, and you fill it in, but essentially you guys were asked to play for Parliament Hill in Ottawa for Queen Elizabeth II.
1997.
And there was a prop on stage, and there was an outfit that you were supposed to have as you performed, and you turned it down. Can you tell us the story?
Well, it was a big deal to get the gig in the first place. It was 500 type year for Newfoundland, and we kind of felt like it was a bit of a coming of age for the province and for us, even though we never really verbalized any of that. The gig we knew was a big gig. We got offered finally to play Canada Day live on Parliament Hill. It would be for international media because the Queen was coming, all that stuff. And then when we got there, the introduction that was scripted for the host for us to do was a crab joke. And he made it was some kind of affected language, and the other host says, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, that's not crabs, that's just newfies crawling up the beach." Or something. I was like, what? Look at that. And then our entrance on stage was to be pulled out in a dory wearing yellow sou'westers. Yeah. And I remember we were young, and we were so delighted to get this gig. I would have done anything to be the good guy, trust me. And I try to explain it as best I can in the book.
You talk about this in the book, that it was important to you that you were liked by these people. You wanted to get along with people, and it was hard for you to talk to them.
It was really hard because and thanks to Sean and Bob and Daryl who were older than me, and they even more than me insisted that we should take a stand about this, and this is not how this is going down. We didn't fight like dogs, both us and and this is where the first notion of us being ambassadors and representatives for the province kind of hit us. I said, this is not what we're showing, and they really didn't like it. They really got pissed off. They being the organizers of the show.
So what happened when you walked in to talk to them about it? You must have been terrified.
I was terrified, yeah, and I was terrified to go to the people from the TV show and from the the organizers of the live concert and tell them that we weren't doing this. We're not going to go out and be pulled out in a dory and this kind of stuff. And secondly, we were asked by the protocol people from the Queen to change the lyrics to Auntie Mary.
Did you guys know Auntie Mary, the song?
Auntie Mary got a canary up the leg of her drawers. According to Mr. Fussypants from the protocol.
That was his name too. That was his name. Colonel Fussypants.
Said, well, this won't do because up the leg of her drawers isn't appropriate for royal. Here. I'm serious. I was backstage myself talking to this guy, and I said, I'm not really understanding what you're asking me to do. And he said, I think up the leg of her pantyhose is more appropriate.
You had a canary up the leg of her pantyhose.
Yeah. And I remember saying, honest to God, and this was round 2 of it, to make a long story short. And I said, dude, I didn't say dude at the time, but I said, I cannot go on that stage on international television and sing up the leg of her pantyhose and get on a plane tomorrow and fly back to St. John. I will get the shit beat out of me on the top of the Duke steps about 9 times. So anyway, when we went in to have this sort of come-to moment with the organizers and the they were really, and I was not only scared and nervous, because I like good times more than bad times, and but I was also very conflicted because part of me wanted to just suck it up because I wanted everyone there backstage to love us. I wanted us to be we're the good guys, we're the hard workers. We're not coming here complaining about shit. We're good. Let's go. No worries. Let's get it done. But it was so egregious, I suppose, in retrospect, that we just couldn't do it, and we had to, at the time, choose between, playing the game that was laid out for us or defending home. And
so that line is interesting to me, because the one thing that happens in the book a lot is you are put in situations where no one thinks Great Big Sea will do well. No one thinks that you guys have the music to play. You open up for Tom Wilson's band, Junk House, and you get up there and play folk songs. But you say to yourself, well, I wonder what songs they might know.
That's right.
You know what I mean? What rock songs can we do?
Yeah.
So there's a certain thread in this book of, and you said this to me one time, you said, Tom, I will lie down backwards and kick my feet up in the air on a trapeze if it makes people dance and have a good night.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, so there's that line, but I felt like in Ottawa, there was another line there too. That there's a certain level that maybe everyone would have had a good time and had a great concert with Southwesters and crabs.
Yep.
Not those kind of crabs, but that was inappropriate. I'm not on the radio.
No, but you're right.
Okay.
You're right.
But I felt like I saw a line develop there.
That's right.
There's such a thing as too far.
Yeah, and I think we had to learn that for ourselves, and we learned it that day, and we paid for it too. I mean, we got our knuckles wrapped for that, and
Well, how do you mean?
Well, we didn't get asked back for it until a long time.
Really?
Yeah, and I talk about it in the book. We didn't get asked back until, what is the young crowd's name again? Buddy and Mrs. They said babies and that.
Kate and
Kate, yeah.
William.
Kate and William, yeah. They came back.
Oh, yes, I know.
We didn't, we weren't blacklisted or anything like that.
No.
But, I mean, we felt that.
And you also paid for it in that you had to do press for the first time. This band that had prided themselves at being the joy, the great night out, you had to start doing press.
We had to start doing press, and that's sort of where we ended up becoming the unofficial kind of odd ambassadors for this, for Newfoundland. And again, that would made us very nervous as well, because every word that came out of my mouth for the next decade, I was like, someone's home going, well, he don't speak for me.
In this book that I thought only I had noticed, which is that Saskatchewan. Anyone here from Saskatchewan? One person from Saskatchewan. The flight did not get out. Saskatchewan is an awful lot like Newfoundland. There's a kinship there.
Yeah, one of the things I talk about in the book is how the whole book is really just about me discovering stuff, because I knew almost nothing. Again, Tommy Hunter, in Canada. That's it. Habs play somewhere in a cool city called Montreal, where people smoke and wear fur coats. And people are really good looking for some reason, and that's about all I knew. And so all these revelations would come across, and sometimes it confirmed any preconceived notion I might have learned or had, and in other cases it's just like you drive. If you're from Petty Harbour, right? And which for those who don't know, this would be pastoral compared to Petty Harbour. Bone rock is how I've always described it. It's like houses clinging to the rocks, and when I talk about arriving in Prince Edward Island, getting off the ferry in Woods Island, first time I talk about how I in one glance of my eyes saw more growable soil than I'd seen in the previous 24 years combined. I described it, I said, you could pick up a handful of dirt and walk to the store and there'd be a potato in your hand. Jesus. I remember standing on the ground in Prince Edward Island, feeling my feet sink into the ground. I'm going what is that? I guarantee you, your feet are not sinking into Skinner's Hill until you're right? So there was always these things that were, some of them were geographical discoveries, and some of them were, and the one that freaked me out about Saskatchewan, because you drive into Saskatchewan, and you can see for the rest of your life, it feels like. I remember being in the back of the van, and the sky starts here, and it ends here. There's nothing to see except sky, and this white line, or this whatever, and we're rolling into Saskatchewan, into Regina, and I just remember going there going they're going to hate us, a lot. There's no boats here. They don't care about wave over. What wave over what? Yeah. But who knew that in the midst of this geographically completely different place, there's this people that share a similar kind of survivalist mentality in Saskatchewan, and Other parts of the prairies too, but I find it in Saskatchewan in particular, and that somehow it's remained kind of, and they kind of have their own language, and they have like their own names for stuff, and they have, and they, but I love the survivalist mentality was the big thing for me. It's like I always joke, it's like about Saskatchewan. It's like almost everywhere else in the world, it's like, it's like, geez, I put my car off the road and I need to tow it out. Just about everywhere in the world they go, in rural Newfoundland or in Saskatchewan, you say to a bunch of guys, I put my car off the road and I need to tow it out. Yes, boy. I was down to Canadian Tire last week and got 2 new chains. Jesus Christ, let's get her going. So they have that problem-solving mentality. Yes.
We're going to be looking for you if the car goes off the road. Having seen it is the reason you have the affection.
Oh, 100%. No doubt about it. Because not only do you get... Look, now, for example, one of the many effects of having traveled just about everywhere in the country, not everywhere, but just about, is that when a news story comes on about, about Moose Jaw, it matters to me.
Yeah.
Like in a way, because I've been there and I've seen it and I've had a night out with those people and I loved them. You know what I mean? And I remember finally reaching British Columbia for the first time, and that's where I met Tom. I don't know if I'm still here, but I remember we had, and it's one of the things, where I finally felt like if we made it all the way to the other ocean, that would be, like if the band stopped that day, it would still be a victory, I think. If I could get to, the other ocean on songs, I figured that would be a massive victory, do you know what I mean? And so we were on our way to Vancouver and we got this gig, kind of last minute. Somebody at this college gig in UNBC in Prince George, British Columbia, backed out or something, and I think it was Barstool Prophets first, who were like a rock band from Ottawa, I think. And then we got put in this middle slot, opening for Junk House. Tom's band.
Is Tom here? Is Tom still here?
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Oh, is there? Anyway, so Tom. Oh, hey, Tom. Yeah,
Tom, do you remember this?
Yes, I do.
What did you say?
Yes, I do.
Believe it or not, there. But so Tom's band, at the time were a huge band and had a big hit on the radio and they were, I don't know, definitely on the heavier side of rock and roll, I think it's fair to say. And it was a bunch of dudes, fucking giving a tour with electric guitars. And it was great, I loved it. And I thought it was a big deal just to get to open for them. I was delighted with that enough. But of course, when we get there, there's guys, there was a few college students there, but then very quickly, because I think it was a Friday, fellas started coming out of like the lumber woods and stuff, right? And they're coming to watch Junk House, and there was a rock band down before us, like I said, and then we had no drummer or nothing. We had a guitar, a bouzouki, 2 whistles, and an accordion. And I was like, and they were all getting off those buses or something, coming out of like woods camps or something. And I was just dudes, just a sea of dudes, right? And I remember going like, we are going to die here today. This is we're going to die. And so we got up there and we gave it to her as hard as we could, and they liked us. They didn't love us, but they liked us enough. And I remember, and I write about this in the book, and I come off stage, and we did well enough. I'd be lying to you if I said it was a home run. But we did well enough for me to think that if we can do that, we can do anything. And they're going to like us here in Canada. And as I'm coming off stage, there's this looming figure. I remember Tom had was sort of in the stocking cap days, but a
toque or something.
A toque cap sort of pulled down. And he's coming to us, it's like, you guys up there singing folk tunes before us, you got balls as big as me. And I don't know if you can remember this, but he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "But you did it, kid. Well done." This type of thing. And as I was turning, I said, "Yeah, I'm looking forward to your set too." And he turns around and goes, "It's only rock and roll, man." That's the coolest fucking dude I ever met.
And he still is.
And he still
and
is.
He still is.
But to answer your question more directly, yes, touring Canada made me realize, that it made me discover so much about the country and made me fall in love with it. But then it also made me realize so much about home, right? Because we have these crazy notions sometimes when you live on an island in the middle of nothing, that Johnny from Penny Harbor is the greatest fish filleter in the world. He is so, and he's the greatest. I said, well, have you checked with all the other sort of filleting places? No, he's the best. And you go like, shouldn't you go like, maybe, now that fella down the road, and I'm like, he can drive a backhoe, he can shave you with the front of the bucket on that backhoe operator in the world. I was like, I sure like maybe in Manitoba, like a lot of people driving backhoes there.
No.
And so those things, and like those geographical things, like, and I described coming back from the prairies for the first time and flying in. Many people have done that flight where you fly in and you sort of loop out around Cap Tower and you look down and the steps are coming up behind Signal Hill. And I'd walked on those steps thousands of times, and it always come from Petty Harbor. It looked like 2% bigger than Petty Harbor. That's it. It was like steps going uphill. We got lots of it, no big deal. And having come from the prairies for the first time, I remember looking at the back of Signal Hill and just understanding the beauty of it, and the it looked like the Great Wall of China or something to me all of a sudden, and there was 1,000 things like that. I think one of the things that as a nation we could do a little bit more of is pat ourselves on the back, and primarily because I think of Canada as a place, not because it thinks it's great, but it's always trying to make itself better.
Right.
And what else can you ask, right, from a country who's like, yeah, we did that wrong, so let's do that, but let's do that better. And how'd you do on that thing over there? Fuck that up altogether. So we're going to do that better. And I love that about the country, and like I say, like I feel really blessed because I got my, trip across the country singing Newfoundland folk songs, right, from a place that just joined, right, and we got signed by labels and I always tell the stories, like, I think there's one country in the world where Great Big Sea could become a national thing, and that's Canada. That's it. Like, I don't know, like, trust me, I don't think there's any band, from Tasmania singing Tasmanian folk songs that, made it on the Much Music of Australia, I tell the story in the last few pages of the book that one time after we got signed to Warner and stuff in Canada, I was doing a press tour, and we were going from one place to another place, and I can't remember the name of the radio station. Tom was what was the one, Mix 99 or something that used to do the beach gig? The one?
In Vancouver?
No, in Toronto. It was used to do a concert on the beach, whatever that big
like
station.
The Edge?
Maybe The Edge or Mix 99 or something like that or something. Anyway, that station that day played like a 4-pack of songs, back to back to back to back, and it was Our Lady Peace, Celine Dion, Susan Aglukark, and Great Big Sea. And I'm like, find me one other country on planet Earth where that can happen.
Alan, it's been a pleasure having you, man.
Thanks for having me.
Hold on.
Because most of the book is really about home, and sort of the theme, even with Tom's book, is about discovering home and being. I suppose in my book in particular, about how it's never far from you, and I think that's true for most Newfoundlanders who go abroad to Canada or wherever else, and so it's always the stuff like this. Well, I have wandered far too long, my weary bones are heavy spent, now won't you lay me down to rest on a pillow fit for a journey's end, where my own father plowed the ground, and he set a table poor but proud. Oh, in the house where I was born, let my sleep be safe and warm, and in my heart so sadly sweet the dream of home. The dream of home, it touches my soul, too soft to fleet, when far o'er the sea or land I roam. Through all my days in foreign lands, And through all my dark and distant nights, pictures of you were so close at hand, and thoughts of you would fill my mind. And though my passage has been long and staid, my first affections never fade. And though my course has been oft confused, my way has always led to you. And in my heart, so sadly sweet, the dream of home, the dream of home. It touches my soul, too soft to plead, when far o'er the sea or land I roam. Now when my story's all but told, oh, let the final chapter tell of victories in lands of gold, and how the mighty villains fell. But if I could hope for just one thing, one final chorus I could sing, well, I'd lift a cup with all my friends, and I'd cheer we made it home again. And in my heart, so sadly sweet, the dream of home, the dream of home. It touches my soul, too soft to plead, when far o'er the sea or land I roam. It touches my soul, too soft to plead, when far o'er the sea or land I roam.
Alan Doyle, everybody. Well, I have a couple of things I need to say.